Most people think economic crises arrive with warning sirens. They imagine stock markets crashing overnight, banks collapsing, or headlines screaming that a recession has begun. But history shows that the most dangerous economic crises often develop quietly. They build beneath the surface while most people remain focused on other things. By the time the majority recognizes the problem, the crisis is already well underway. Today, I want to talk about what I believe is the economic crisis nobody is talking about. It's not just inflation. It's not just debt. It's not just artificial intelligence. It's not just government spending. It's a combination of forces that are colliding at the same time, creating a situation that could fundamentally reshape the American economy over the next decade. When I study history, I don't focus on individual events. I focus on patterns. Throughout history, great powers have risen because they were productive, innovative, and financially disciplined. They declined when debt became excessive, political divisions intensified, and economic productivity slowed. This pattern has repeated itself countless times. Ancient empires experienced it. European powers experienced it. Modern nations have experienced it. The names change, but the cycle remains remarkably consistent. That's why understanding cycles is so important. Cycles allow us to see risks before they become obvious. One of the biggest misconceptions in modern economics is the belief that debt doesn't matter. For years, governments around the world borrowed enormous amounts of money. Interest rates were low, and borrowing appeared painless. Politicians could spend more without immediately raising taxes. Businesses could borrow cheaply. Consumers could finance homes, cars, and lifestyles with relative ease. Everything seemed manageable. But debt is like gravity. You can ignore it for a while, but eventually it makes itself known. Every dollar borrowed today represents a claim on future income. The larger the debt becomes, the greater the burden placed on future generations. The United States now faces debt levels that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago. Many people assume that because America controls the world's reserve currency, it can continue borrowing indefinitely, while the United States enjoys advantages that other countries do not. Even reserve currencies are not immune to economic realities. Investors lend money because they believe they will be repaid. Confidence is the foundation of every financial system. If confidence weakens, borrowing becomes more expensive. As borrowing becomes more expensive, debt becomes harder to manage. That creates a dangerous feedback loop. What makes today's situation especially concerning is that debt is growing at a time when interest rates are much higher than they were during the era of easy money. For years, governments benefited from extraordinarily low borrowing costs. Today, those costs are rising. Every increase in interest rates raises the cost of servicing debt. Imagine carrying a massive mortgage and suddenly discovering that your monthly payment has doubled. That's essentially what many governments are facing. The more resources devoted to interest payments, the fewer resources remain available for education, infrastructure, healthcare innovation, and economic growth. At the same time, another transformation is unfolding. Artificial intelligence is advancing faster than almost anyone expected. Most discussions about AI focus on its potential benefits, and those benefits are significant. AI can increase productivity, accelerate scientific discoveries, improve efficiency, and create entirely new industries. But every technological revolution has winners and losers. The Industrial Revolution transformed agriculture and manufacturing. The Internet transformed communication and commerce. AI may transform knowledge work itself. That possibility should not be underestimated. Millions of Americans work in occupations that involve processing information, analyzing data, creating reports, answering questions, managing workflows, or performing repetitive intellectual tasks. These jobs have historically been considered safe. They required education, training, and specialized skills. Yet many of these functions can now be automated to varying degrees. This does not mean that all jobs will disappear. It does mean that competition may increase, wages may face pressure, and workers may need to adapt more rapidly than previous generations. The problem is that economic systems do not adjust overnight. A company can replace a process in months. A worker may need years to retrain. During that gap, uncertainty grows. Households become cautious. Spending slows. Investment decisions become more difficult. Economic confidence weakens. These pressures accumulate gradually until they begin affecting the broader economy. Another issue that receives far less attention than it deserves is demographic change. For decades, America's growth was supported by a large and expanding workforce. Younger generations entered the labor market, paid taxes, purchased homes, and supported economic activity. Today, many developed nations face aging populations. As populations age, spending patterns change, labor shortages emerge, healthcare costs rise, pension obligations increase, economic growth often slows. Demographics are powerful because they operate over decades rather than months. They are slow-moving forces that can reshape entire economies. Meanwhile, political polarization continues to intensify. Economic challenges become much harder to solve when societies are deeply divided. Throughout history, countries facing major financial stress often experienced rising political conflict. Different groups blame different causes. Trust in institutions declines. Cooperation becomes more difficult. Policy decisions become increasingly influenced by short-term political incentives rather than long-term economic considerations. This creates an environment where necessary reforms are delayed until circumstances become unavoidable. The financial markets themselves may also be sending signals that many investors are overlooking. During long periods of prosperity, risk-taking tends to increase. Investors become more comfortable. Asset prices rise. Optimism grows. People begin believing that certain investments can only go higher. History repeatedly demonstrates that periods of excessive confidence are often followed by periods of disappointment. This does not mean markets are destined to crash tomorrow. It means investors should remain aware that high valuations and elevated expectations can create vulnerabilities. One reason economic crises surprise people is that human psychology tends to focus on recent experiences. If inflation has recently fallen, people assume inflation is solved. If markets have recently risen, people assume growth will continue. If unemployment remains low, people assume stability is permanent. Yet economic systems are dynamic. Conditions change. Trends reverse. Risks evolve. Successful investors constantly challenge their assumptions because they understand that the future rarely unfolds exactly as expected. Perhaps the most overlooked issue today is the interaction between all these forces. Debt alone might be manageable. Technological disruption alone might be manageable. Demographic shifts alone might be manageable. Political divisions alone might be manageable. But when multiple pressures emerge simultaneously, the system becomes more fragile. Complex systems often appear stable until a threshold is reached. Then change occurs much faster than anyone anticipated. History teaches us that major turning points rarely look obvious while they are happening. Looking back, everything seems clear. Looking forward, uncertainty dominates. The challenge is recognizing the signals before they become headlines. That's why investors, business owners, and workers should pay attention to long-term trends rather than short-term noise. The economic crisis nobody is talking about is not a single event. It is the convergence of debt, demographics, technology, geopolitics, and political division. Each factor influences the others. Together, they create a level of uncertainty that traditional economic models may struggle to capture. The question is not whether these forces exist. The question is how societies respond to them. And the truth is that the next chapter of this story may already be beginning. The reason this crisis remains largely invisible is because financial systems can appear healthy long after underlying weaknesses begin to develop. People see employment numbers, stock market gains, and consumer spending and assume everything is fine. But beneath the surface, structural problems continue to grow. History shows that economic systems often reach inflection points when confidence and reality begin moving in opposite directions. One of the most important concepts investors should understand is that money itself depends on trust. Every financial asset ultimately derives value from confidence. Confidence in governments, confidence in institutions, confidence in future economic growth. When confidence is strong, systems function smoothly. When confidence weakens, volatility increases. Small problems can quickly become larger problems because participants become more cautious. Today, governments around the world face difficult choices. They must support economic growth while controlling inflation. They must manage debt while funding essential services. They must encourage innovation while protecting workers from disruption. None of these objectives are easy. In many cases, pursuing one goal can make another goal harder to achieve. These trade-offs are becoming increasingly significant. At the same time, globalization is changing. For decades, businesses optimized supply chains for efficiency. Products were manufactured where costs were lowest. Capital flowed freely across borders. This system helped lower prices and increase profitability. However, geopolitical tensions have encouraged many countries to prioritize resilience over efficiency. Production is being relocated. Strategic industries are being protected. Supply chains are being redesigned. While these changes may improve security, they often increase costs. Higher costs create inflationary pressures. Inflation reduces purchasing power. Reduced purchasing power affects consumer behavior. Consumer behavior drives economic activity. Everything is connected. That's why seemingly unrelated developments often produce unexpected consequences. Technology adds another layer of complexity. Artificial intelligence may generate tremendous productivity gains. Historically, productivity growth has been one of the most important drivers of rising living standards. Yet productivity gains are not always distributed evenly. Some individuals, companies, and industries benefit enormously while others struggle to adapt. Managing that transition will require flexibility, education, and forward-thinking leadership. For individuals, the most important lesson is adaptability. The world is changing faster than many people realize. Skills that were valuable yesterday may become less valuable tomorrow. New opportunities will emerge, but taking advantage of those opportunities requires continuous learning. The ability to adapt may become one of the most important economic advantages of the 21st century. Investors should also recognize that diversification matters more during uncertain periods. Concentrated bets often perform well during favorable environments. However, periods of structural change tend to produce unexpected outcomes. Diversification does not eliminate risk, but it helps reduce vulnerability to any single scenario. This principle has remained true throughout financial history. Another critical lesson involves financial flexibility. Individuals who maintain strong balance sheets generally navigate uncertainty more effectively. Excessive debt limits choices. Savings create options. Flexibility provides resilience during periods of change. Resilience often matters more than maximizing short-term returns. The future will almost certainly include challenges. It will also include opportunities. Every major economic transformation has created both. The Industrial Revolution disrupted existing industries while creating entirely new ones. The Information Age transformed business models while generating enormous wealth. The coming era may follow a similar pattern. The challenge is preparing for change rather than resisting it. What concerns me is not that America faces problems. Every nation faces problems. What concerns me is the tendency to underestimate long-term structural forces because short-term conditions appear stable. Stability can create complacency. Complacency can delay preparation. Delayed preparation can increase vulnerability. The economic crisis nobody is talking about is not necessarily a collapse. It is the possibility that the economic environment of the future may be fundamentally different from the environment that shaped the past several decades. Debt may remain higher. Interest rates may remain more volatile. Technological disruption may accelerate. Global competition may intensify. Political divisions may continue influencing economic decisions. If these trends continue, success will belong to those who understand change rather than fear it. Individuals who remain flexible, informed, and prepared will have advantages. Businesses that anticipate new realities will outperform those clinging to outdated assumptions. Investors who focus on long-term fundamentals rather than short-term headlines will be better positioned to navigate uncertainty. History does not repeat exactly, but it often rhymes. The patterns that shape previous turning points are visible today. The challenge is recognizing them early enough to act intelligently. That's why I believe the most important economic conversation today isn't about the next quarter, the next election, or even the next recession. It's about understanding the deeper forces reshaping the world. Because by the time everyone is talking about the crisis, it won't be the crisis nobody is talking about anymore. It will be the reality everyone is forced to face. And those who prepared early will have the greatest opportunity not only to survive the changes ahead, but to thrive because of them.